Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where I can assure you this show is not coming from the Kremlin, okay? So forget all what some of the people out there in La La Land in the United States say about media that doesn't come from big corporations based in New York and Los Angeles, okay? We are not one of those, nor, like I said, are we from the Kremlin, so you'll note that there is no Russian accent. Anyway, what I'd like to deal with this show is the idea of why we really need to recognize our manipulation, and why we need to recognize the importance of symbols, and how we can recognize symbols, and what's really involved in this entire, what I would say is a culture war. Okay? Now, there are those who say the culture war is over. The left has won. Okay? I can't remember the name of the, oh my gosh, well, I can't remember his name, a British or Australian commentator who had a viral video on why Hillary Clinton lost the election. And he said, the left won the culture war. And really, it's true. Okay, if you look at the educational establishments of the United States, if you look to a large degree the religious climate in the United States, even conservative churches, well, most of the conservative churches today would be considered liberal if they suddenly were thrust back 50 years in a time machine. The media absolutely is to the left. And entertainment, I'm separating the two, because media involves everything, but usually has a connotation as being news and so forth when we talk about it in a political, social sense. Entertainment we can think of as our TV shows and our movies. Now, there is a blending of those. Oh my gosh, there is a blending. But we have to consider that pretty much the people that are left of center culturally, okay, you can make a distinction. The left of center culturally has pretty much a firm control over the mechanisms of the mass media communication influence structure of the United States. And, it's kind of ironic, actually. I heard a quote, oh my God, I can't remember who said it, but they said, Sweden is the most non-religious country on earth, whereas India is the most religious. And America is like being India ruled by Sweden. Now, if you think about, I'm not just going to talk about religion, I'm talking about the whole structure of traditionalism, conservatism, and that sort of thing. Now, the problem that conservatives have, now don't take offense at this, conservatives don't think as deeply, by and large, okay, don't switch that dial now listen to me, by and large, they're not the kind of people who think super, super deeply into an issue, in the Carl Jung sense, where you see something and you analyze it for all of its meaning, the signs and the symbols and that sort of thing. Now, there are conservatives that do it, okay, but for the most part, conservative people tend to see things more as this is the message, this is what I read into it, or see, and that is, again, the message. Whereas a lot of people on, I would say, the left are more astute at being able to say, oh, these are the hidden things. Here's how you can use a symbol. Here's how you can even use colors to influence the mood of an audience. Okay? Because it tends to be that left people are a little bit more into the creative aspects of, any of the businesses or cultures and so forth. So we really see the technological field is dominated by the left, and the media field is dominated by the left. By technology, I don't mean science. I mean, if you look at the big tech companies today, they tend, Silicon Valley, they tend to be Democrat, okay? And, that's an issue for another show when it comes to, how things go around search engines and all this thing about labeling so-called fake news and so forth. But really, I think that conservative people really need to look at the areas of how they can be manipulated, and not so much them maybe. When you're 45 years old, let's say you've got the two kids, 45-year-old housewife, you work part-time, and, take the kids to soccer practice and so forth. You and your husband are happily married and that sort of thing. Well, the thing is that you probably are pretty set in your ways. Okay? There's not going to be a lot of deviation. You're not suddenly going to go out and get tattooed and get nose piercings and this sort of thing, because your value system has pretty much been firmly established. Now, the thing is, those two kids you've got, they're watching TV. Okay? And by the way, I don't mean to do this. I'll get into this later. Just the mere fact of me saying two kids is part of a cultural construct that has actually been forced upon American culture and Western culture as an expected limit. And we see it in our mind when we think of a family, even on a church pamphlet, it's two parents and two kids, that sort of thing. But anyway, let's go on here. Your children are watching TV, and they're listening to music videos, and so forth. And if you think about it, how much time do you spend actually in some sort of role as a sage in which you are explaining life to them and the meaning of life and those kinds of things? Every TV show they watch is doing that. And that is very dangerous, actually, because the thing is that these are subtle, and they're scientific, and they've been designed by people that have PhDs in psychology and or marketing and so forth. In the same way that they market, they come up with really, really intricate, fancy ways to sell you a bottle of shampoo, they're also incorporating their own mindsets into the product, that being television shows and music videos and plays and that sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying, shut everything off, but if you understand it, if you understand where it's coming from, you will not be susceptible to it, nor will your children. And I'll get into that in a moment. Now, the thing is, we really have a situation now where it is part of the culture war is the individual versus the society. Generally speaking, conservatives are more towards the individual. They're the ones who believe that individual rights and liberties and thought is paramount in all things. Whereas the society, which is more towards the left, liberals in the American sense, tend to be more towards the collective, believing that what's good for the greater masses or what's fair to the greater masses is what's right. And much of their appeal is emotion versus people more towards the conservative end, who tend to be more towards the intellectual. Now, I know that there's probably liberals out there going, wait, I get in debates all the time with people on religion who are conservative and they don't listen to me and blah, 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 and that sort of thing. Well, you know what? These vary according to topic. Okay, and just in fairness, I know a lot of conservatives who really are very well versed in physics and mathematics and, the various sciences, and, they're quite religious. But again, another show. Now, the thing is, I want to read to you a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay? He's also the one that came up with that quote, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. Well, anyway, that's not the quote I wanted to throw out there, although it's great to keep in mind when you're exercising. He stated, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely, often, and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Okay? Now, that's very important. The idea of owning yourself. You must be aware of all of the techniques that are being used to get you not to be yourself. And I would liken this to this. I love analogies, and so bear with me. You might think this sucks, but think about this. When you watch television, when you watch all these things, you're getting little by little incorporated. A little bit of you is becoming more like whatever you're seeing, because these are stories. And maybe a little bit here and there is not going to hurt you. It's like a mosquito. If you're out in the springtime in most places and you go without your shirt, you're going to get bitten a couple times, but it's not going to really be a major deal. It's just going to be a little irritating. But I can guarantee you that if you go to Waldo Lake in Oregon, it's a high mountain lake, great fishing, by the way, and let's say you decide you're going to spend the weekend naked. You're going to go totally nudist. That's something a lot of Oregonians do. You're going to be eaten alive. You will not survive. You will be drained of blood, because all these little bites are taking place. And that's the same thing. A little here, a little there, you don't notice it. If you get a whole bunch of them, then you start noticing. But the thing is, the way media works is you get a little bit, and let's just say you're losing blood, and you may get diseases and so forth. And that's the way that television works. And, mass propaganda, which television is. Believe me, propaganda is just something designed to get you to change your mind. Okay? It's not, some secret base somewhere in Virginia run by the CIA, trying to send out propaganda. Anything that's designed to change your mind is propaganda. Okay? Because there's no such thing as something that's non-biased. Oh my gosh, the media, when it comes to the election, well, we covered Donald Trump. But at the same time, their coverage was always negative. It's like Trump makes blatant falsehood a statement about, these are the headlines you saw. Bernie Sanders, he saw the, let's just show really weird people that look like they just, came out of Woodstock, 1969, talk about how they love Bernie Sanders. Well, of course, that alienates people. But it is propaganda. And I'll get into the signs and symbols and so forth. Now, Edward Bernays, father of modern advertising. I would say he's the father of American culture today. He stated, in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small numbers of persons. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. Notice he even says the ethical. Okay? That is very important, because a lot of people, especially religious people, are like, oh, I read my Bible and that's all I need. Hey, don't switch the dial. I'm not trying to mock religious people, okay? I'm mocking atheists. I mock religious people. I'll mock everyone. But the thing is, you can't just go by that, because these guys know how to use marketing skills on you and your children. Now, I'll get into that as soon as I read this last quote. One more quote from Edward Bernays. Those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. It is in almost every act of our lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. Now, you know what? I'm going to be fair to feminists here. Okay? If there's any feminists out there listening. And I'll just say this. Who decided that women should shave their legs? Did some woman just wake up one morning and say, you know what? My legs look hairier than my husband's. I think I'm going to shave them. Or how about their underarms? Or later, now everyone gets like Brazilian wax jobs and that sort of thing. Now, the thing is, for better or worse, whatever you may believe is, more attractive or less attractive, the thing is, this all started through magazines making suggestions in their articles around, I think it was around 1915, that there was a campaign that was undertaken by a Eastern magazine, and the whole idea was, shaving underarms. Before that, no one cared because, your clothes covered that area. And so, every woman pretty much before 1915 was hairy. But the thing is, whether you like it or not, what caused the change? It was a suggestion made and then reinforced through what you saw in the movies, what the fashion industry suggested, and so forth. Okay? Just like if we fast forward to the 1990s, it was the lingerie companies and pornography that really got the whole, Brazilian wax job thing going. And, this is something that's just happened. And now it's not so, much that it has to be really pushed. It's just a given. The same way with hairstyles. Look at the styles people wore in the mid-'70s. If you watch any movie, or even the mid-'80s, mid-'70s, you had kind of the Battlestar Galactica look, the hairstyle. More of a natural, maybe a little bit longer Beatles sort of look. In the 1980s, you had the look that was more of the frizzy and but still long hair. My wife had switched on the movie Footloose a few days ago, and you could kind of see that style, women and men both. And as time has gone on, hairstyles have changed. But who decided that? Who decides what should be in and what should be out? Right now, a lot of fashion ads show men with, kind of ironic. They have short beards, kind of like the Paul Ryan congressman, he had for a while. I usually say it's more like Ahmed Ahmadinejad of Iran. I sometimes think that's where Paul Ryan got the idea from, although I think Ahmadinejad looks a little bit more authentic. The thing is that you got these guys with shaved chest and beards and so forth. But, that's something that people, you see it more and more in media, and not everyone adopts it. But many people do. In fact, the majority generally do. And there's instances of this throughout the ages, too. T-shirts. I can't remember the name of the movie, but there was one, I think it was Marlon Brando, who wore a T-shirt, and he, a lot of women out there were like, oh my gosh, I want my husband to look like Marlon Brando. And subconsciously. So they bought their husband's T-shirts to wear, and they actually started getting to where it was okay to wear T-shirts in public versus what used to be something you only wore like when you were out, pounding hammers, pounding nails when you were putting stuff on the roof or something like that. Bikinis. When the bikini first came out, it was really hard for the fashion designers to find women willing to model them. Okay? It took a while, and then as it got, you started seeing women in bikinis in movies and then later television and so forth, it became the norm. It wasn't that all of a sudden women in the 1940s wanted to wear less. It was that it was like, okay, well, here's a style we're going to promote for one reason or another. The idea of small families, I mentioned it a few minutes ago. You can look up, what is it? Just look up fertility transition soap operas and media on Google, and I think you'll find some of the articles too, but also there's some videos where there's presentations by people that point out that, one of the reasons why you show small families in, like soap operas in Latin America was to encourage family planning in smaller families. And it worked, okay? It worked. You shot the birth rate of places like Brazil and Mexico from like 6 and 7 children back in the early 70s to now it's around 2, a little over 2 children per family. That is a radical change, and it's not just in the urban areas. You can think, well, people live in small places, they're going to have smaller families. It's also out in the rural areas too. And I've always said, you want Africa to lower its birth rate, give them all televisions. It guaranteed it'll work. Now, the thing is, what we see is what we think of as reality. We may know different, but what we see on television escapes our conscious reasoning and goes into our subconscious minds. It's a story. Humans are storytellers. We tell stories. We always have. What do you think people did to amuse themselves, 200 years ago? What do you think people did or even still do in some remote parts of the world? You get the campfire and you tell epic stories and so forth. And the thing is that humans are conditioned to go by, hearing stories and so forth. And you put television on, and everything's a story. Now, think about this. Let's say you switch on, a music station. Well, there's only a few, but, a music station, children's network or something. And take a look at what the message is. Okay? Sit down and actually look at the clothes, what people are saying, what they think is important, all of these kinds of things, language use, and then you understand what the message is of the program. Remember, they don't call it programming for nothing. Now, there's a message there, and if you're that 45-year-old housewife, you're not thinking in the same way that your 10-year-old might be thinking when they're watching this stuff. They're getting an education, all right. They're getting storytellers, but they're not the storytellers you want them to be, by and large. They're being taught materialism, superficiality. They're being taught selfishness. They're being taught it's me, 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 and that's what's important. They're not being encouraged to study. They're not being encouraged to look at history, to find what's important, as examples. They're being encouraged to go for glitz, bling, the plastic culture. And heck, why not? The corporations that make money off of this, why wouldn't they promote that? If you start promoting things like, thrift and to take a word from the left, sustainability and all these kinds of phrases, it would cut into profits. You got to make sure that you're changing the styles and so forth, and you're changing everything in order to get people mesmerized by the program. Now, the one thing I have to point out here, and it's extremely important, I look back at the classes I took in high school, and yes, I loved biology. Oh my gosh, I love biology. It was my favorite class. Couldn't get enough of it. But two of the classes that are probably the most important that I took were debate and also film literature. I took film literature. Now, it's ironic. I mean, I write books now. You can look up Freedom from Conscience. There's 5 books in that series. Just came out with a science fiction book, The Destiny of Our Past, science fiction detective thriller set in the era of Noah. But the thing is, I hated literature. I hated it with a passion. I didn't want to read something someone else wrote. And I was able to compensate those credits by taking film literature. Same was true in college, too. I could take film literature and not have to take regular literature. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the film literature taught me how to look at little simple things and know what the director was trying to promote. Okay? And it's very, 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 very important. Little, tiny things. Watch it in your show. What's the message? Okay? You could take one simple sitcom. And I mean simple because I can't watch them. I mean, there's maybe like Big Bang Theory. I like it. I'm not terribly thrilled by some of the messages and so forth, but I think it's funny. But let's just say you take a sitcom, out there that's actually kind of aimed for the masses. You know, those kind of shows you put on they last for one season, they're kind of cutesy, and they just die. Because people at first like, oh, okay, let's watch this, Martha. Okay, and they watch it. And pretty soon it's like, I don't see this show's going anywhere, Martha. Let's see if there's something else. Well, that's okay, dear. They just canceled that show, so there's nothing new there. Okay? People spend freaking 4 or 5 hours on the average watching television in the United States. Okay? Film literature should be freaking required in the schools. Okay? It really should. Cut out a literature course. Cut out an English course. Put film literature in there. Because they need to be better able to analyze and consume the mass media. Now, the thing is, there's so many things. You can look at music videos. I mean, you take a look at David Bowie's, Black Star video, the last video he turned out before dying. And my gosh, the whole thing is symbolism, and so forth. And it's easy to really kind of get into that and see that was very symbolic. And you can see things out there where people have said, well, this represents this and this represents that. Okay? It wasn't just hey, this would be kind of a cool costume to put on someone and it'll fit the music. No way. Music videos aren't like that. Not even rap music is like that. So, the thing is, all the genres, country, rap, metal, symphonic metal, goth, you name it. There is a purpose behind the way it's presented. But it's no different for TV shows. What's the statements made? Now, these are some of the things I'd like you to look at in your analysis of TV programs. How is religion treated? Okay? Is it mocked? Is it put down? Is it ignored? And what religion is being talked about? This gives you an idea of, basically the mindset of the people who are putting your programs on. And, and sometimes I've noticed that villains will wear like a cross or something. Or they'll mention the villain's religion. Now, there's a purpose to that. It's not just thrown in for like, we need to find something to make him look really bad. No, that's a jab at the religion. Okay? If you make your serial killer wear a cross and mention how, and maybe mention things about God, and so forth, and yes, I do that in my books too, but I make sure that there's more than just a little mention of religion. There's a lot of religion, so you know that there is a contrast. But the thing is that, TV shows and movies, often you get a very clear message about how the writer felt about religion. And it's very telling when people will say, hey, this show actually is kind of nice to religion. It's very rare. Very rare. Now, of course, there could be two different reasons. One is they want to ignore religion so it'll go away. Or it could be that they're not wanting to offend any religion when they market this outside of the country. Because we do live in a global media industry now. So therefore, you may be marketing to countries that don't share the same basic religious values and affiliations that you find most prevalent in the United States. But still, it has an impact on your 10-year-old who's watching the show. Now, you can also take a look at how people are depicted, how they're depicted, whether they, live in a small town or a big city. And by and large, people, Hollywood's done this for years. People that live in small cities are depicted as corrupt. The police departments are usually corrupt or inept. You need some FBI to come in there and save them, or some federal marshal or something to come in and clean the mess up. Nowadays, they're depicted as kind of trashy, especially if it's any kind of shows depicting the South. The people are, they're kind of dumb. And then you contrast that with the city, where people wear the stylish clothes and go to the right sushi bars or, whatever. But you see, a lot of that has to do with the fact that people that live in the city are the ones that write that do the screenplays or do the writing or put on the movies and TV shows. And so this is flyover zone. Okay? Your flyover zone. If you live in between New York and Los Angeles. And so you're going to be depicted in a way that's not going to really represent you. Check it out and look at it. Now, I'll bet you anything you're going to see a lot of stuff dealing with politicians that are appealing to the masses. The evil populist and so forth. You'll see that. And, whatever your opinion is on that, watch for it and see. Because I think that's going to become a very big theme in entertainment here soon. Now, you can also, you can look at, oh my gosh, there's so much you can go into. It's like a Carl Jung, book or something. You can look at camera angles. You can look at what the goals of people are. What is the norm? How many children are presented? If you look at your circle of friends and how many, children there are, take a look at television. It's devoid of kids. If there's a program in which maybe you've got 5 or 6 couples, maybe one of them has 1 or 2 kids. It's a culture that exists in the urban areas of the United States. Not so much in more the rural. Although the more that you process these values and filter them through to the rural areas, and by rural I mean, not the big cities. You could be living in a community of 200,000 and you're sort of rural as opposed to Los Angeles or New York or Miami or Dallas or something. And, people catch that they catch into that. And so, just analyze. I mean, what are some of the other things that are presented? I remember when I was a kid, and there is an impact. When I was a kid, I watched the TV series Bewitched. My family, there was no alcohol in the house. My parents weren't terribly super religious or anything. They just didn't have alcohol in the house. But yet I thought that when I grew up, I'm going to have to drink alcohol because there was alcohol on that show. I was watching it when I was 5 years old. So you kind of believe that, well, that's the norm. You see, we catch it, we incorporate these things. Unless we have some other dominant subculture that will enable us to resist that. I mean, I guess if you're Mormon or a member of some of the more fundamentalist churches and you don't believe in drinking, then maybe you won't be so inclined to drink. But the thing is that this is part of the I would say programming again. I was watching a show. My wife just sat down with her mom during the holidays and switched on a show. And my gosh, okay. First of all, I'm not against vaccines, okay? I'm not one of the people. It's just like, oh my gosh, vaccines are horrible and that sort of thing. No. Do I think maybe sometimes people go overboard? Yeah, I do. I think they do. I don't think children, in the womb or little babies necessarily need all these vaccines that they're getting. But I don't believe, I wouldn't leave my children unvaccinated completely. But in America, for some reason, people get vaccines a lot younger and a lot more than they do in, for instance, Europe or the industrialized areas of Asia. But this show you could just tell that they had really incorporated this idea of shaming people who didn't get vaccines, because they made sure that all of these kinds of things like, oh, but this disease, it's not that big a deal. But of course, then I kind of left, but I kind of get the idea the kid was going to die of this disease because there was no vaccine. And it was kind of wrong. Oh, well, there is no vaccine, but there should be a vaccine. If there was a vaccine, then this kid wouldn't have to die. But the message was, you could just tell it was incorporated into it. In the same way that you can incorporate all kinds of stuff, like someone saying, oh, well, I need to go to the store and buy some condoms before I get married. That's sending the message out of using contraception even when you're married. I mean, and you may be for this, okay? You may think, okay, well, it's a good thing. But the thing is that it's still part of a programming. There's no such thing as just mindless entertainment. There never really has been, okay? There never really has been. I mean, you can look back at World War II, all those Tom and Jerry's and Warner Brother cartoons, that were turned out to support the war effort and so forth. But what I'm looking at mostly is just that we need to look at symbols. And I would encourage people to listen to some discussions on symbolism in TV shows today and movies. There's websites. I mean, I know some people that are really into this. They're really into this website called The Vigilant Citizen. And I've seen it a couple times, and it looks like they really delve into trying to figure out, usually occultic symbolism, but they're really going into trying to figure out what makes things tick, what kind of messages are being sent, and so forth. I mean, again, I usually pick these things up just automatically. I could watch a show and suddenly think, oh, well, they've included this in the background. That's interesting. There is a reason for that. Or why is this here and why is that there, and so forth. But once you get that down and you can actually sit there with your kids and you could say, well, why do you think they put that in there? Why do you think TV shows today incorporate this into their show versus maybe 30 years ago when they didn't do that? And get them thinking. You don't have to sit there and give them some sort of, like I said, Carl Jung lecture on symbolism, but you can get them to start looking and make it fun. Maybe say, let's watch some music videos. Bring up some of these 80s videos that were just so filled with symbolism, or, some of the newer David Bowie videos. Or, there's so many videos out there that you could say, what are they trying to get? I mean, my gosh, you could look at Korn. They did one on surveillance. It's, if you don't know the group, it's spelled Korm, and if you type in surveillance state, I think it'll take you to the video where they're mocking the NSA and our politicians and so forth for spying and trying to distract us from the media. But, try this out. It really, really, really will enhance your children's ability to question. And believe me, if they don't question, then just park them in front. Just park them in front of kids' TV. Let them be on social media, unsupervised. Put them in front of the music channels and so forth, and let that educate them. But then don't be so surprised if they turn out, even though you may take them to church every Sunday or take them to synagogue every Saturday or even to mosque. Don't they? I think that's Friday afternoons for mosque. You may take them to all these places and give them all the training you want. But when they get out there in the world, they're going to become just like the great masses have been programmed and conditioned to be in our society. And, maybe it is hard. I've heard people from various religions, yes, Christians and Muslims both, point out that it's really hard to keep their kids on the right path when they have a society that is so on the other side. But if they learn to analyze themselves without being told, well, you don't watch this because, oh my gosh, I hate if someone would tell me, don't watch this because. I want them to, if someone tells me you shouldn't watch this because of this, and give me reasons, then I might take them, seriously. But not if I'm just told, oh, well, you shouldn't watch it, it's not appropriate. Tell me why it's not. And then tell me why the show that is on during prime time that is twice as bad in its content is appropriate to watch. Okay? You got to have that kind of mindset. I'm sorry. If you want to make sure that your children keep the values that you want them to keep. And, maybe the 45-year-old couple, maybe they could be susceptible to some of this too. Okay? I have seen a lot of older people who've gone from being pretty conservative to suddenly becoming quite liberal because what? They retire and then they spend lots of time watching TV. And it could change, so it does change them, but I'm more concerned with what happens with kids. Okay, because they're our future. Not to say old people aren't important, but the children are our future. And we, whatever, if the culture that will exist 20 years ago, 20 years from now, the dominant culture is in high school right now. Okay, think about that 20 years from now.